Hello, everyone, and welcome to my first analysis of Tenet.
Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So as you probably guessed, I've recently watched Tenet and I have to say that it blew my mind. Everything about this movie is amazing. I loved the actors, I loved the effects, the story. Even though some critics said that the dialogues were unintelligible at some point or that it was too pretentious, I'm gonna have to disagree with them, and it did deliver to me. So if you're watching this video, then you know as well as I do that once you finish watching Tenet, you realize you're gonna have to watch it a second time. Now, before doing this video, I saw many other videos out there on YouTube of different fans that made their own timelines, and in some cases, even with 3D models. So, of course, I had to do my very own timeline, and well, here you have it. I armed myself with 2 sheets of paper, 2 Sharpies and a ruler, and I started pointing out every single event that it's important or that can give us at least some reference in time to continue the story. To make it more comprehensible, what I did is that I separated my timeline in weeks, because during the movie we have references in either weeks or a simple specific date. Most details actually happen in the timeline going forward. However, I will also mention some details that happen during the backwards timeline. I will also discuss a couple of details that I found interesting or that it simply raised more questions. Before we continue, remember that you can subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications, and if you would like to follow me on Instagram and see a couple of pictures of me and my dogs, you can also follow me there. So first things first. The only date that is actually addressed by its number, it's May the 14th. This is a very important date because 3 major events happen in the exact day. That is the detonation that the British intelligence detected at Stocks 12, the failed heist at the Kiev Opera, and finally the last romantic holiday at Vietnam. This date is also important because it marks the beginning and the end of this movie. So, of course, I was not gonna make you suffer trying to understand my handwriting, so I decided to redo the entire thing bits by bits using this video editor. We start with our timeline here in May the 14th. After the events at the opera in Kiev, the protagonist is captured by Sator's man, he is tortured, and he then takes the suicide pills. We do not know exactly how long it took for the goons to torture the protagonist. We do know that it only took 15 minutes for the other person to give in and die, but we don't know exactly how long this continued. When the protagonist realizes that he has still 1 more hour of torture to go, he decides to go for the pill. He is later retrieved and recruited by Tenet. They allow him some time to reconstruct his mouth and also to recover. He is later taken to a tower where he exercises and trains so that he can be in shape to continue his mission. He is later taken again in a ship and left in Denmark, or at least that's what I understood from this GPS disc car that he just easily takes like nothing's nothing. From there we begin week number 2. At Denmark, the protagonist meets the scientist, and this is how we learn about inverted entropy. Now take a look at this insane detail. Look at how the casing and the bullet come together when he presses the trigger. The bullets were made in India, which makes the protagonist having to travel to Mumbai. In Mumbai, the protagonist meets Neil, which in a second viewing it's one of the most bittersweet moments. However, we also meet Priya. She is also important because she is part of Tenet. She is the first person to mention Sator, and she sends the protagonist to England so that he can speak to Sir Michael Crosby. It is during this conversation that we learn that the failed heist at Opera House happened 2 weeks before. From this moment, weeks 3 and 4 are all about the fake Goya. We learn about Kat and how she sold a fake Goya to her own husband, Sator. The protagonist observes Kat before showing up at her job. They have dinner, he kicks a couple of goons, and from there, the protagonist and Neil have to travel to Oslo, where they will steal the fake Goya. We know that they don't spend only a couple of days doing all of this. We see them arriving to Oslo. Then Neil visits Rota so that he can observe from the inside of the facilities. Then Maher is recruited, and they keep the entire rest of the time planning and training for the heist. And this takes me to my second insane detail. Look at Maher holding this chronometer, helping both the protagonist and Neil hold their breath for a longer period of time, since they're gonna have to be trapped inside a vault with halide gas. And so we finish week number 4 with the events that happened at Oslo. Now, the next scenes give us a much better reference about time here. The protagonist has to travel back to Mumbai and speak to Priya. Priya shows him a newspaper where the story about the Oslo happenings is shown. Christopher Nolan was very careful to not show us the exact date of this newspaper, as you can see here. However, the story was written on June 12th. This is how I assumed that the Oslo heist happened on the 9th of June the 11th, and that probably this conversation is happening on June the 13th. Priya also tells the protagonist our second time reference. She tells him that the 241 will be transported in 1 week from now to Tallinn. That will be approximately on June the 20th. The protagonist now has to travel to Greece to meet Seta in person. After a very graphic conversation, the protagonist is invited to go sailing the very next morning with Seta and Kat. That evening, the protagonist sees Seta receiving inverted gold, and that's how he gets funding to plan and recruit for the heist at Tallinn. The protagonist then with Neil travel to Tallinn, and they spend the rest of the week planning the heist. The heist at Tallinn happened somewhere around the 20th of June. This is the furthest point in our timeline, and from here all of our characters have to travel back in time, except for a very brief period that I'm going to address. After inverting, the protagonist Neil and Kat have to travel inside a Rota's container that has been conditioned for inverted people and objects. Considering that the events at Oslo happened on June the 11th, our characters must have waited for at least 9 days inside the container. Almost immediately after inverting at the Oslo Freeport, the protagonist asks Neil to bring Priya because in 2 days he will talk to her and she will lie to him. So he needs to see her before she gets the opportunity to lie. At this meeting, Priya refuses his request and decides to lie to him. She does, however, inform him that they can travel back in time using the turnstile that now Ives has, so they can reach back to May the 14th. And this is how I get to my third detail. Now this is getting a bit confusing. In this point we are in June the 12th, and she still hasn't experienced the conversation that she will have with the protagonist at Mumbai the next day. But somehow she already knows about the turnstile that Ives has, and we know that he didn't have one by June the 12th. So, if everybody has been telling the truth, the only way that she can know about the turnstile at this date is if she has had any kind of communication with future Ives. This is not impossible, since Ives could have left a message for posterity after the events at Stalks 12, and let's remember that Priya is also very well informed. Not completely informed, but well informed. The other solution I can think of is that when Ives said,
"There's no way of bringing you back,"
he was actually lying, because lying
is standard operating procedure.
Now from this point, the protagonist Neil and Kat travel to Trondheim, where they are again inverted so they can travel back in time until May the 14th. During their journey, we can see Ives' men training both inverted and in forward timeline, and we can also see our main protagonists discussing their plan, exercising and healing. Kat travels back in time an extra day so that she can have enough time to go back from there to Vietnam and continue the plan. And so we finish this movie with the events of Stalks 12 and the second part of the Vietnam holiday, putting all 3 events together the very same May the 14th. I didn't want to make the theoretical timeline of Neil going back to the past and save the protagonist at the Opry in Kiev and then opening the gate and taking the bullet back at Stalks 12. However, I do have another theory about how Neil traveled back to the past in the first place. I hope to have that video ready soon. And so we reached the end of this video. If you liked it, please remember to leave a like. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. God bless and goodbye.